The outgoing US President Joe Biden has authorized Ukraine to use long-range American missiles to strike targets inside the Kursk region of Russia. The decision has been met with scorn from President-elect Donald Trump's allies, with Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene describing it as an America last decision and saying that the American people don't want to fight foreign wars. Earlier, former Republican Congressman Denver Riggleman told us here at Times Radio's Evening Edition that Biden was sending a message.
I think the fear for Ukraine is that Donald Trump will automatically insist on some type of brokered peace. And if Ukraine doesn't come to the table, then the United States would remove all assistance and all aid, which I'm completely against. So I think that's what Joe Biden is trying to say, is that this administration is still fully in the camp for Ukraine, that the next administration should be also.
Well, let's speak to Michael Birnbaum now, national security correspondent at the Washington Post. Good evening, Michael.
Good evening.
What we've seen here is a decision long awaited by Joe Biden. We didn't know if he would get there or not, but he has authorised use of ATACMS, the long-range missiles, US missiles, by Ukraine inside Russian territory, specifically just in that Kursk region, as we understand. That's been a long time coming, according to many. But there's also the accusation that's been hurtled at Joe Biden that actually he's creating an escalation here, that Donald Trump is going to be forced to clear up when he takes administration.
That's right. So it is a complicated decision and a complicated policy, one that President Biden has been resisting for months because he's been concerned about the escalation potential. And Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that this kind of decision would be escalatory, long-range missiles hitting Russian territory. What the Biden administration says, what senior administration officials have told us, is that Russia itself has escalated by drawing in these North Korean troops over the last few weeks in the Kursk region. And this is a response intended at addressing that escalation and pushing it back and putting Ukraine in the best possible place, both on the battlefield and in potential negotiations with Russia when President Trump comes back into office.
So all we've been hearing from Donald Trump's team, or certainly his son and others, is that this is an escalation, that Joe Biden here is playing with World War III, that this could get to a point where Russia starts to unleash merry hell to a much wider context. In fact, there's been various statements made today by Russia. Sergei Markov, the Russian political scientist, former advisor to Putin, told us here on Times Radio that Biden's decision marked a very big step towards nuclear war. What is Joe Biden to interpret from all that?
So the steps that have been taken, the decision to allow Ukraine to hit into Russia, what we've been told is that it is a limited decision. Fundamentally, Ukraine does not have that many missiles, long-range missiles to use. It's one that is expected to be focused, as you said, on the Kursk region, where the North Korean troops have deployed, where the Ukrainian military is holding some Russian territory. Certainly, it's been discussed on both sides as a decision that has escalatory potential, but the thinking here, the calculation here, is to limit it in such a way that kind of minimizes the potential of things stretching, spiraling out of control. But it's absolutely the case. This is something that they've expressed worry about in the past.
Has there been any conversation there about whether these missiles can be used in the Kursk region for now, but also whether that might extend, whether perhaps there could be some strategy behind, hitting certain military targets within Russia, for example, defence bases, other arms stores, etc. Could we see these missiles be used outside Kursk?
So Ukraine has been campaigning for this policy change for months. They have had a list of targets of things that they say would be militarily advantageous to hit that are within the 190-mile range of the ATACMS missiles. And they say it would be a helpful change. the U.S. Officials whom I've spoken to have said the initial attacks are expected to focus on Kursk, but they could indeed broaden later on. So we'll see. But I think that they're working with a limited stockpile, a very limited stockpile. So it's not obvious, how broad or how long this kind of escalation will last.
We've had our Defence Secretary speak in the Commons in the House today. The UK government have been pretty coy on whether our long-range missiles, the Storm Shadows, which use US technology, might be used by Ukraine in the same way that your long-range missiles will be. Our Defence Secretary was pushed on the matter. He did say that there'll be talks with Kyiv tonight, but remained pretty tight-lipped about what the UK's stance was. Has there been any discussion over there about whether the UK might follow suit?
Well, it certainly would be a logical extension of the U.S. decision. My understanding is that the British government has been more comfortable than President Biden about allowing the Ukrainians to strike deep into Russia. Storm Shadows use U.S. components that allows the Biden administration to have essentially veto power on how they get used. There has been a policy shift in the U.S. on the U.S. weaponry. I think there is ongoing discussion about the British weaponry. Yes, I haven't confirmed that there has been a policy shift with the Storm Shadows, but you'd think that would eventually come and happen.
Okay, and just one other story to ask you about, and this was a post by Donald Trump that he then followed up earlier, and this is talk of him using the US military to enforce mass deportations of undocumented migrants. It is sort of one of his policy pledges, one of the points of order, I suppose, that attracted many Americans to vote for Donald Trump, and he's been speaking about his intention to deport millions of people he thinks are in the US illegally. What's the reaction been like to that today, that he is prepared or talking about using US military to enforce this?
That is indeed an idea that he is floating, declaring a national emergency, perhaps on day one, on the 20th of January, when he comes into office. His supporters elected him partly because of his views on migration and immigration policy. His top allies are saying he could declare a national emergency. There are certainly among Democrats, a lot of concern and opposition. Lots of questions about the workability and the legality of that sort of action. But for sure, some big changes in store about how the United States views migration and enforces its immigration policy.
Great to speak to you. Thank you. Michael Birnbaum, national security correspondent at The Washington Post.